Hey guys, this is Podfics, and today we're going to be reading Birds of a Feather by Howells_Library. This is Chapter 15. It had been over 1 week since the discovery that alternate forms of magic and energy had been creeping into the darkest parts of the city, taking hold inside the most dangerous people in the city. Peter felt the weight of everything that had happened in the past week. The devastating casualties, the horror creeping through Gotham, and the sheer power that Kython's influence had given the villains they now faced. Every night he lay awake, caught between a need to act and the grim reality of what waiting cost the city. It had taken time, but Peter had come to accept that no matter which universe he was in, darkness would always follow him. Now he had a responsibility to face it head on. The guilt from his decision with Dr. Strange weighed heavily on him, but with each passing night, he forced himself to let it go. The only way to honor the sacrifice he'd made was to take responsibility for the effects it had caused here. Dick had been his guide through it all, using their nightly patrols to help him focus. They learned quickly that this was no ordinary fight against Gotham's villains. Dick would listen to Peter's frustrations and worries over a private comm line, teaching him the strategic patience that was critical for this mission. For some reason, Peter thought they were just going to jump in and take down the bad guys right away. Now he feels a bit dumb for thinking that. He realized pretty quickly that doing that would have led them to trying rather than succeeding. "We're not here to try," Dick had told him one night, his voice a calm but determined reminder through his calm. "We're here to succeed, to save." It made Peter realize just how little he understood about the BatFamily's methodical approach. In his world, rushing into action was second nature, a way to feel like he was doing something. But here, he could see the value in preparation. Batman, with all his meticulous planning, had trained them to be more than just reactionary heroes. They weren't just surviving, they were working to win. Still, watching Gotham suffer while they prepared had been heart-wrenching. Every day, reports of the chaos poured in. A city on the edge, people cowering in fear, Joker leaving psychological scars that would never fully heal. Dick and Damian did their best to remind him that all of it would be worth it, if they were ultimately successful. It was a lesson Peter hadn't fully understood before. Sometimes, inaction was the most painful form of courage. But what really drove home the magnitude of the situation was watching Wanda, Zatanna, Constantine, and Steven scrying and communicating with each other across realms and dimensions. Their astral forms flickered and shimmered like faint lights hovering in the cave, and Peter found it surreal. Here he was, with some of the most powerful magical figures in existence, trying to save a city he hadn't even known a few months ago. One night, while Peter was studying the Batcomputer's display on the city grid with Tim, he looked up to see Zatanna hovering in her astral form, her face etched with worry. Wanda's spirit was beside her, fiery and intent, speaking to Constantine, who kept one foot in their dimension, and another in whatever arcane plane he drew power from. It felt otherworldly, and it was. This was a battle Peter had never been prepared for. "We're close to figuring out a way to seal off Kython's access points," Zatanna said, her voice echoing slightly. "But it's going to take more time, and he's strengthening by the day." Wanda's image turned to Peter, her eyes softening. "Peter, this isn't just about stopping a force of chaos. It's about giving people a chance. You need to trust that every day you prepare, every step we take together, is all building towards that moment, and you'll know when it's time to strike." Peter nodded, her words settling into him, soothing and empowering him all at once. He couldn't shake the surreal nature of everything around him, but he knew he had no choice but to push forward. Later, he returned to the manor with Dick and Damian after a long night patrolling the city's outer areas, checking on neighborhoods and families they'd been protecting in advance of any attack. Peter was exhausted, but steadied himself with a new resolve. He had to be ready. When they finally faced Kython's forces head-on, he knew there'd be no room for hesitation. And for now, watching Dick and Damian navigate through the chaos with calm and control, he found a quiet reassurance he hadn't expected. A few hours later, he was in the Batcave with the whole Bat-family. They were tense, but resolved, their plans coming together with each piece of intel they gathered. Zatanna's astral projection shimmered as she stood alongside Constantine, her focus sharp and unwavering. "Kython is going to push harder," Zatanna warned. "We've managed to close off a few access points, but the big ones remain open, and he's doubling his efforts through the villains. He's experimenting with them. I'm afraid he's going to escalate." Constantine nodded grimly. "I've seen it before. Push every twisted stunt he can to weaken us. Make us think there's no way out. It's his game. Break our spirit before we even get a shot at him." Peter looked over at Bruce. "So what do we do? We can't just wait until he's strong enough to take over." Bruce's eyes were hard as steel. "We're running out of time. But we're not powerless. We need to escalate our efforts in the city. Strike quickly. Disrupt his influence before he grows too strong. It's a gamble, but if we can keep him from gaining more ground, it'll buy us the time we need to seal him out completely." Tim pulled up the map of Gotham's recent disturbances. Our enemies are spread out, each taking advantage of their newly amplified powers. Joker's illusions are spreading fear through the entire districts, and Mr. Freeze's left blocks of the city frozen solid. They're not just acting at random, they're coordinated. Barbara turned to Peter, her gaze intent. Wanda and Steven believe that your arrival here caused the universe's timeline to weaken, that you inadvertently opened the door for Kython. If that's true, then the longer he's allowed to feed on the chaos, the more permanent his foothold becomes. Peter's gut twisted at the reminder, the responsibility of it all, but he took a deep breath, forcing himself to face it. Then we'll take them down. If we can stop the villains, we'll weaken his hold, and if we disrupt his power, it might give us enough time to seal those access points. Damon spoke up, his tone fierce. I don't care how powerful they've become, or stronger. Hit them from every angle, cut off their influence before they even see us coming. Bruce nodded. Exactly. We'll take the fight to them. Zatanna and Constantine will work on sealing the access points, and the rest of us will handle the streets. We're hitting them tonight. Peter felt a rush of anticipation coursing through him. The moment he had been waiting for, the moment to take action, had finally come. His heart beat fast, steadying him, grounding him. As he looked around at his newfound family, he didn't know what the outcome would be, but he knew one thing. Together, they would make it count. Batman reiterated that the most vulnerable villains were the ones called Scarecrow and the Riddler. They also were ones closest to the bigger holding points. With them out of the picture, Wanda and Zatanna would be able to cast the sealing spell with the help of Strange and Constantine. As he started to get ready to receive his assignment on where he would be going, Peter looked at the pictures he had taken the past week. He started to think back to the conversation he had throughout it that made him feel ready for this upcoming battle. 1 week ago, Monday, Peter and America sat on the edge of the rooftop overlooking Gotham. The city's lights a stark contrast to the shadows creeping through its streets. It had become routine for them to slip away from the others, taking refuge on the rooftops where they could talk freely, away from the weight of responsibility and expectations that followed them in a sideways manner. Peter sighed, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his gaze fixed on the hazy skyline. You know, you could go anywhere, he murmured. You don't have to stay here, especially not with this mess. He gestured to the chaotic streets below, the distant sirens echoing throughout the night. With everything that's happening, no one would blame you for leaving. You could find a safe universe, away from all this. America looked at him, her expression unwavering. And what? Leave you here alone to deal with this? She shook her head, her gaze turning resolute. Not a chance, Peter. I'm staying. Peter's brow furrowed, a mixture of frustration and gratitude pulling at his expression. But why? I mean, look around. The city, this whole universe, is broken. You could go anywhere in the multiverse. Why would you stay in a place that's practically falling apart? America's mouth twisted in a small smile, her eyes reflecting a depth of determination he hadn't seen before. Because that's what I do. I'm the herald of the multiverse, Peter. Protecting universes, stopping things like this, that's my responsibility. You might feel like you're the reason this is happening, but I'm just as much a part of it. Kython is feeding on the multiverse, and that's my territory. If I can help stop him here, I'm going to. Peter shook his head, running a hand through his hair. But still, with everything you've been through, all the fighting, all the losses, don't you want to be somewhere safe for once? Somewhere you're not constantly having to look over your shoulder? America's smile softened and she looked away, her gaze turning distant as she considered his words. I'm used to it by now, Peter. The multiverse, it's a big place. There's no such thing as safe in the way that you're talking about. She paused, searching for the right words. But here, in this fight, I'm doing something that matters. And it's not just about saving universes. It's about standing with people I care about. You, Wanda, Strange. All of you have been there for me in ways I didn't think anyone could be. She took a deep breath as if summoning the courage to say something she hadn't spoken aloud before. You know, I've spent most of my life alone. No family, no real home, just wandering. It's hard not to feel like I don't belong anywhere. Like the multiverse itself is just a series of places I passed through without ever staying long enough to call home. She looked over at him, her eyes meeting his with fierce intensity. But here, fighting with you, helping protect this universe, it feels different. It feels like I'm finally doing what I was meant to do. Peter's expression softened, his gaze shifting to the ground as he listened. He'd spent so long feeling like his presence in this universe was a burden on everyone around him. Like every hardship he faced was somehow his fault. But America's words cut through his guilt, giving him a perspective he hadn't considered before. So you're staying? He asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. Yeah, America replied, her voice steady. This is bigger than me, bigger than all of us. And if I'm the one with the power to cross universes to find threats before they spread, then I have a duty to protect what I can. Besides, she gave him a teasing smile. What kind of friend would I be if I left you here to deal with all of this alone? Peter chuckled, the sound carrying a hint of relief. Guess you stuck with me, huh? Guess I am, she replied, nudging his shoulder with her own. Face it, Peter. You got a team now. A family. And I'm not going anywhere. They sat in comfortable silence, each taking in the words they shared. For the first time in what felt like forever, Peter allowed himself to feel the comfort of not being alone, of knowing that someone had chosen to stand by his side, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. America's presence grounded him with her quiet strength, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there were people who would stand with him, no matter what. And as he looked out over Gotham's troubled streets, he felt a spark of hope ignite within him, a reminder that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. 5 days ago, Wednesday, the lights in the Wayne Manor Library cast a warm glow over the room, illuminating the vast rows of books that towered over them. Peter was leaning along a long oak table, a large tome opened in front of him, but his eyes were distant, lost in thought. Across from him, Barbara and Jason sat in silence, sensing the heaviness in Peter's expression. Barbara broke the silence, her voice gentle. You look like you have something on your mind, Peter. Peter looked up, his gaze shifting between them before he sighed, closing the book in front of him. I was just thinking about when you guys both found me here the first night, he said softly. I was in the library, surrounded by books, and you two walked in. I don't know what I looked like then, but I felt alone, lost, I guess. Jason gave a small, understanding smile. You looked like a guy who'd seen some rough times, kind of like the rest of us when we first came here. Peter chuckled, but his smile faded quickly, replaced by a look of uncertainty. Sometimes I think about how different things could have been, like, what if I had just been a regular guy with a regular life? No Spiderman, no powers, no multiverse, just a normal kid with a normal family. His voice dropped to a whisper. Is it terrible that I sometimes wish for that? To just be someone else? Barbara leaned forward, her eyes warm with empathy. No, Peter, it's not terrible. It's human. Everyone who's been through what we've been through has thought about that. Jason and I, we've both had those moments. It's normal to wonder what life would have been like if things were simpler. Peter looked at her, surprised by the openness in her expression. You too? Barbara nodded, glancing at Jason, who looked back at her knowingly. When I was paralyzed, I went through every version of what if I could think of, she said softly. What if I hadn't gone out that night? What if I'd never joined Bruce? What if I'd just stayed home and lived a normal life? Her voice grew quieter and more reflective. I used to dream about what I thought my life was supposed to be, what the family I might have had, the things I'd never get to do, and I hated myself for wanting that because it felt like I was betraying everything I stood for, everything I'd fought for. Peter's eyes softened. But you got through it. Barbara smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Yes, but it wasn't easy, and it took a long time. I had to forgive myself for wanting something different, for wanting to be Barbara and not just Batgirl. And eventually, I found a new purpose, a different way to help. Jason shifted beside her, his face tense but resolved. For me it was different, but kind of the same, he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. I didn't get paralyzed. I got killed. Straight up. He let out a dry chuckle, but there was a bitterness in his tone that made Peter's chest tighten. It's funny, Jason continued, his voice low. When you die, there's this part of you that just thinks about all the things you'll never get to do. All the normal things that just gone. No family, no friends, no future. When I came back, I kept asking myself, why me? Why did I have to go through that? Why couldn't I have just had a normal life? I wanted to help people, but it cost me everything. Peter looked at them both, his guilt surfacing again. I know I haven't been through anything like that, but I still feel like I should be grateful. But sometimes all I can think about is how much I've lost. All the people I've hurt just by being Spider-Man. He looked down, his voice barely a whisper. And then I feel guilty because I know I wanted this life once. I wanted to be a hero, and I thought it was supposed to be some adventure. But now I just wonder if it was worth it. Barbara reached across the table, placing a gentle hand on his. Peter, it's okay to feel that way. We've all been there. The idea of being a hero sounds noble, but the reality, it's different. It's full of sacrifice, and that doesn't make you ungrateful. It makes you human. Jason gave him a nod, his expression serious. You're allowed to want normalcy, Peter. We all do, even if we don't talk about it much. None of us chose this life because it was easy, and sometimes, yeah, it sucks. It's okay to admit that. Peter felt a weight lift from his shoulders, as though pressure he hadn't even realized was there had suddenly eased. Thanks, he said quietly, looking between them with a newfound appreciation. I guess I just needed to hear that. Barbara squeezed his hand, her voice filled with quiet strength. Anytime. You're part of this family now, and no matter how you're feeling, we're here to remind you that you're not alone. Jason leaned back, crossing his arms with a smirk. Yeah, kid, you're stuck with us. We've got your back whether you're in hero mode or just wishing for a normal day. Besides, his smirk softened into a genuine smile. Sometimes it's okay to just be Peter. They sat in comfortable silence, the three of them finding solace in each other's company. 3 days ago, Friday. Peter was about to turn in for the night, exhaustion settling into his bones after another long day. He shut the door to his room quietly and walked over to his bed, running a hand over his face, trying to shake off the weight of everything on his mind. As he sat down, he heard a quiet, almost imperceptible sound behind him. Couldn't sleep? Batman's low voice cut through the stillness. Peter startled, whipping around to see Bruce standing in the corner of his room, partially obscured by shadow. Even though he was out of his suit, the intensity in Bruce's gaze was unmistakable. Mr. Wayne, Peter stammered, sitting up a little straighter. Didn't see you there. Bruce gave him a small nod, stepping forward into the faint light. I thought I'd come by and talk for a moment. I know this week has been a lot for all of us. He paused, his voice growing even quieter. But especially for you. Peter swallowed, sensing that Bruce had something serious on his mind. I'll be okay. I mean, I know there's a lot happening right now, but I can handle it. Bruce nodded, taking a seat in the chair by the desk. For a moment, he just looked at Peter, his gaze heavy with something Peter couldn't quite identify. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured but sincere. I wanted to talk to you about what's coming, and about loss. Peter felt his chest tighten, the weight of that word sinking in. Loss was something he knew too well, something he carried with him like a shadow. Right, he said quietly, unsure of where Bruce was going with this. Bruce's gaze was steady. Gotham is different from what you're used to. It's dark, it's relentless. And this fight with Kython, it won't be like anything you faced before. This city doesn't just demand strength, it demands sacrifice. Peter shifted, looking down at his hands, his fingers twisted together. I know, I've lost people before. I know what it's like to lose. Bruce's expression softened, a rare warmth flickering in his eyes. The pain you've been through, it doesn't make you weak, it makes you prepared. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But this time, I want you to understand that whatever happens, whatever losses we face, it won't be your fault. Peter blinked, taken aback. He hadn't expected that. But if something goes wrong, if people get hurt, I'm part of this. I'm the reason Kython's even here, right? Bruce shook his head, his gaze firm. Peter, loss is a part of this life. It's part of being a hero, but you can't carry all of it on your shoulders. Even if you feel like you're to blame, even if things happen that are out of your control, you are not at fault. Peter's jaw tightened, his throat constricted as he tried to process Bruce's words. But I can't just not feel responsible. I mean, people here, they're getting hurt, and some of them, they won't make it. And it feels like I'm failing them. Bruce leaned forward, his voice lowering. We all feel that way, Peter. I've been where you are. I've spent nights blaming myself for every life lost, every person I couldn't save, but eventually I learned something. If you carry the weight of every tragedy, it will break you. And you can't protect anyone if you're broken. Peter's eyes dropped to the floor, his voice heavy with conflicting emotions. I don't want to let anyone down. I don't want to be the reason people die. Bruce placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm but comforting. It's okay to care. It's good to care. But I need you to understand this. Even the best heroes can't save everyone. There will be losses, and sometimes there's nothing we can do to stop them. But that doesn't mean you're to blame. Peter looked up, meeting Bruce's gaze, searching for the strength he saw in the man before him. But how do you deal with that? How do you just keep going, knowing you can't save everyone? Bruce's face softened, his expression haunted but resolute. You focus on what you can do. You save the people you can, and when you lose someone, you honor them by fighting even harder. He paused, his voice quiet but fierce, because every life you save matters, even if it's just one. Peter nodded slowly, taking in Bruce's words, letting them settle in his mind. So, if things don't go the way we hope, if there are losses, I have to keep going. I can't let it stop me. Exactly, Bruce said, a glint of approval in his eyes. You have a good heart, Peter, but sometimes being a hero means accepting that we can't control everything. All we can do is our best, every single day. Peter took a deep breath, the weight in his chest easing slightly. Thank you for saying that. Bruce's hand remained on his shoulder for a moment longer before he stood, his expression softening. I just wanted you to know, Peter, you're not alone in this. We all carry that weight, but here in Gotham, we carry it together. Peter felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of acceptance he hadn't expected. He looked up at Bruce, his voice steadier now. I won't let you down. Whatever happens, I'll keep fighting. Bruce gave him a small nod. I know you will. We'll be right there with you. As Bruce turned to leave, Peter sat back, his heart filled with a new determination. He'd been afraid of the losses that might come, afraid of failing the people who depended on him. But now, with Bruce's words echoing in his mind, he knew he could face it. Whatever came next, he would honor the lives he saved, the ones he couldn't, just as Bruce had taught him. 1 day ago, yesterday, Peter sat on the steps outside Wayne Manor, watching as the last light of the day faded behind Gotham's skyline. The shadows grew long, casting the old stone walls of the manor in a soft, dusky glow. The air was cool, crisp with approaching night, and Peter wrapped his arms around his knees, lost in thought. A quiet shuffle sounded behind him, and he turned to see Dick Grayson walking over, hands in his pockets, a soft smile on his face. "Mind if I join you?" Peter shook his head, returning the smile. "No, not at all." Dick took a seat beside him on the stone steps, stretching his legs out in front of him and sighing as he looked out over the city. Beautiful night. Quiet for once. Peter nodded, glancing over at him. Yeah, feels nice. Like things are calm, even if it's just for a moment. They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city together as darkness settled in around them. Finally, Dick turned to him, his eyes warm with something Peter hadn't seen before. A look of pure, unfiltered pride. "You know," Dick began, his voice soft, "I'm so proud of you, Peter. For everything you've done, the way you've handled everything since you got here, it's incredible." Peter blinked, surprised by the raw sincerity in Dick's tone. Thanks. That means a lot coming from you." Dick placed a hand on Peter's shoulder, that smile widening. "You're tough, Peter. Braver than most people I know. I've seen the way you carry yourself, how hard you work to help everyone you can. And well, I know the version of me from your universe. If he was still with you, I know he'd be proud of you too. You'd be the luckiest dad in the world." Peter felt his throat tighten, a wave of emotion rising in his chest. The thought of having a father who felt that way, of having someone who truly believed in him, was something he'd hardly dared to imagine. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely holding steady. "Thank you for everything you've done for me. Thank you for everything you've done since I got here. I don't know what I'd do without you. Without all of this." Dick's expression softened and he squeezed Peter's shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, Peter. I'd do it again in every universe if I could. Because you're worth it. You deserve to have people who care about you, people who will be there no matter what." Peter looked down, blinking back tears, a smile breaking through the emotions threatening to overwhelm him. It's been hard, you know? There's so much going on, and I feel like I'm just waiting for the next thing to go wrong." Dick nodded, his gaze distant for a moment as if lost in his own memories. "I get it. There's always something lurking around the corner in this life, especially in Gotham. But you don't have to carry it all by yourself. That's what family's for, right?" Peter nodded, his heart feeling a bit lighter, the weight of the upcoming battle just a little easier to bear. "Yeah, it is. I never thought I'd have that again." Dick's smile was soft, filled with understanding. "Well, you've got it now, and that's not going to change." They sat together, the night air cooling around them, silence settling comfortably between them. But after a while, Peter glanced over, his expression turning more serious. "So, what should I expect from all of this?" he asked, a hint of apprehension in his voice. "From what's coming?" Dick chuckled, a playful glint in his eye. "Honestly, I don't know." He shrugged, his smile wide. "But there's a kind of fun in anonymity, don't you think?" Peter raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Fun? You're not scared of the unknown?" Dick laughed, shaking his head. "Oh, I am. But I've also learned that half the adventure is not knowing what's coming. Makes the victories that much sweeter." Peter's smile grew, a spark of excitement igniting in his chest. "Guess you're right. Maybe there's something exciting about not knowing everything. It makes it feel like we're writing the story as we go." Dick gave him a nudge, his voice filled with warmth. "Exactly. And no matter what happens, you're not facing it alone. We're all in this together. Whatever's out there, we'll take it on, one step at a time." They stayed on the steps, watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. It was comforting. Back to present day. Peter looked at himself in the mirror as his comms went off. He lightly smacked himself in the face with both hands and took a deep breath. The people he was with, he loved and cared for them. He made mistakes, but they still returned to the feelings of love and care back to him. That's what counts. He looked down at the communicator and saw the text. Scarecrow and Harley Quinn, Gotham Corp. Nightwing, Robin, Nightbird, Miss America, Spiderman, Constantine, Superboy. He took another deep breath, then looked back at himself in the mirror. He nodded to himself and walked out of the room. Alright guys, and that is the end of chapter 15 of Birds of a Feather by Howells and his Score Library. I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next chapter.